Hi everyone, in this video we're going to look at section 4.4, Simplifying Algebraic Expressions Involving Radicals. A radical expression contains variables in the radicand. For example, the square root of x, or the square root of x squared, or even the cubed root of x. In these cases, however, these variables cannot take on just any value. There are restrictions, and we must consider these restrictions when we're looking at radical expressions. We must consider what values of x are not allowed or not permitted. Let's take, for example, a square root. In the case of a square root, we cannot take the square root of a negative number. So for example, if we had the square root of -4, we could easily take the square root of a +4. We know it's 2. But we cannot take the square root of -4. A -2 times a -2 would give us a +4. And a +2 times a +2 would also give us a +4, not a -4. So there is no square root of this -4. So to avoid a situation such as this that's not allowed, we state the restrictions on the variable. In other words, we state the values of x that are not allowed. The values of x that are not allowed. So that's a really important thing to note going into this section. So let's take a look at example 1, where we're given the square root of x, so kind of the most basic form of this radical expression. And let's think about what are the numbers that we could use for x. What would be allowed? Well, we could use, for example, the square root of 2, or the square root of 3. We could have the square root of 74, or we could have the square root of 0. We could even have the square root of a number with a decimal, such as the square root of 2.3. All of these are completely okay, because all of these values are not negative. So in other words, we must have values for x that are positive, that are greater than or equal to 0, right? The key word, they are positive values. On the other hand, let's take a look at some examples of numbers that could not be used for x. So based on this, you should kind of know that it's going to be values that are negative, right? So for example, we could not have the square root of a -2. We could not have the square root of a -3, or a -74, or a -2.3. None of these would be acceptable because they are negative values. So in other words, we cannot have values for x less than 0, or we cannot have negative values. Therefore, our restriction is x must be greater than or equal to 0. You can take the square root of 0, it's just 0. Or you can take the square root of any positive number. So if you want to write this in words, the note would be that any numbers under a square root must be greater than or equal to 0. That is, x must be positive.